This is the AllProWrestling100 Podcast for the week of September 5th, 2019, episode 001. We are the one podcast you've been looking for all of your pro wrestling recaps, news, and rumors each week. In this week's episode, we're going to talk about the busiest week in pro wrestling since WrestleMania, with a Starrcast interview from CM Punk, an All Elite pay-per-view, and two great programs from the WWE. In the history segment this week, we're going to talk about King of the Ring and the influence it's had on the people who have been involved in it over the years. And in our third segment, we're going to talk about this podcast and what you can expect to hear from us in the coming weeks. So let's get right to it with some news. Impact Wrestling Friday night was taped, unfortunately, and we'll get to why that didn't work out for them in a few minutes. Basically, they're spinning some wheels. They've got a big pay-per-view Bound for Glory coming up in a couple of months, like 51 days away. So they're trying to set some storylines up. In the meantime, they've got Ken Shamrock coming back, for those of you that want to see a 60-year-old Ken Shamrock get in the ring. It appears he's going to fight Moose in Las Vegas next month, so get ready for that. We set up a feud between Taya Valkyrie and Tenille Dashwood, the former Emmalina, who refused to be sexy for Vince McMahon. She's been running around on the indie circuit for a while, and she's finally made her way to Impact Wrestling, and they're going to set her up in a Knockouts title feud with Taya. Taya Valkyrie, by the way, by the next time we see her in a taped program, she will have been the Impact Knockouts champion for longer than any other Impact Knockouts champion. I think Gail Kim had that record before, so congratulations to Taya Valkyrie. She's a great champion. A lot of fun to watch in the ring. They're in AAA Mexico right now, and one of the many partnerships with various independent organizations. This week's program featured a lot of AAA Mexico stars like Vanilla and Big Mama. I don't watch AAA Mexico, but when I do have a chance to see the people that have been featured on Impact, I've usually been impressed, namely Pentagon Jr. and Phoenix, who are one of the greatest tag teams in the world, folks. We're going to get to that when we talk about AEW later. Speaking of, let's move forward now. We had a Starrcast this week with a guy named CM Punk, and everybody gets excited when they hear CM Punk's name. So he sat down and talked for about an hour and a half about a whole lot of things that had nothing to do with a comeback to professional wrestling. He told some great stories, but basically said he's comfortable in the life that he has, and he can't really see a future where he'd be back. I don't know. Every pro wrestler gets the itch in their 40s to come back, and if the money's right, look at The Undertaker. He just keeps coming back. So I think CM Punk, he said he would take the call if Hunter or Vince called him. And that is a long way from where we were when he left, 5 years ago? So it's progress, but for those of you that were hoping there'd be a run-in from CM Punk in the main event at the AEW pay-per-view, that just wasn't in the cards. But it was good to see old Phil, and he is a funny guy. It was nice to hear him talk wrestling. The highlight for me, and for most of the people that were there, seemed to be that whether it was a shoot or not, CM Punk pretended to not know that current athletes on the WWE roster are being given time off. And in the era where, Sasha Banks can take off to Thailand and go hang out and dye her hair blue, and she's welcomed back with a new storyline, that is a far cry from where things were when Punk left and was having the problems he was having with his injuries 6 years ago. I might as well weigh in on it since we're talking about it. Obviously, a pro wrestling fan can't feel like the company did right by CM Punk. If he was as injured as he said he was and had the issues with the painkillers and the concussions, he claims there was some issues with some doctors and some on-staff doctors giving diagnoses that were favorable to a full-time work schedule for a WWE performer. Either way, you'd like to believe that these guys that put their bodies on the line and their brains on the line each week would be taken care of. And I think everybody can agree that the superstars of 2019 are taken better care of than the superstars of the Attitude Era. Pro football and other sports have led the way in that, but Vince tries to be proactive, and it's kind of like Winston Churchill used to say about the United States. The United States will always do the right thing after every other possible option has been exhausted. And Vince McMahon and the WWE are a corporation now, so they're going to do right by their employees. It may just take some time. But the idea that Punk would take their call means he understands that things are evolving. And the look of astonishment on his face, like I said, I don't know if it's a shoot or not, but he acted genuinely surprised, and it was entertaining. And he kept going back to, I can't believe this. Did you hear that They're giving time off. All you have to do is ask for time off. He says he wants to take a future WWE contract just so he can walk in on his debut night and tell Vince or Hunter that he really feels like he needs a vacation, because he says that would be worth it. Like I said, it was an entertaining hour and 45-minute interview. There were a lot of Starrcast performers giving interviews, but I didn't see anybody but Punk this year. So it was a good interview. If you get a chance, go ahead and watch it. Later that night, AEW had a pay-per-view. The buy-in featured a women's casino battle royale. No one still has any idea what that means, women's casino battle royale. But a bunch of women in the ring. The one who won was Nyla Rose. She's terrible, and she's dangerous in the ring. She's going to hurt somebody. She may have hurt somebody in that match. I don't know the fascination that the management at AEW seemed to have with Nyla Rose, but I don't understand a lot of these indie people they've hired and are going to push to the moon. The commentators want us to believe that Nyla Rose is the future of the women's division in AEW, and I just can't believe that. She's sloppy, she's messy. She's obviously a bigger girl, which I'm fine with, but she put a girl out over the top rope, missed the apron, missed the other performers, and just dropped her straight on her tailbone. And nobody needs to take a 10-foot drop on their tailbone from a 300-pound woman who doesn't know how to wrestle. So hopefully, with all the talent they had in the ring, they had Dr. Britt Baker and a lot of people that I was interested in, but Nyla Rose wasn't one of them. Kenny Omega versus Pac, the artist formerly known as Neville, was probably the best singles match on the card. Pac went over, which I think is a very big deal. Think about this. AEW tells us that they want this to be about records and that wins and losses mean something. So I'm going to have a problem with a storyline where Kenny Omega is set to face Dean Ambrose Moxley for months, and then in the last 2 weeks, Neville, the man that gravity forgot, steps up, and Kenny Omega gets over in 15 minutes. And I'm going to wonder how that's possible. Is Neville just not the same caliber athlete as Kenny Omega? It would have been terrible writing, and I'm very proud of the company for what they did. I'm sure it was Kenny Omega's idea, but he put over Pac in a great match where they both looked good. It sets up a future storyline, and it shows that wins and losses matter, and that not everybody in the management of this company is going to think they have to put themselves over every pay-per-view. Cody. Yeah, speaking of, let's get to Cody Rhodes. If any of you ever watched when Cody's dad, Dusty, was the booker for the NWA territories or WCW in its early days, Dusty managed to put himself next to every guy got any kind of heat at all. If there was somebody the fans cheered, Dusty was standing next to him, even if it didn't make any sense. And somehow Dusty ended up, in the top half of the card, in the longest matches of the night, and getting over on everybody at most of the big events. And the people like Dusty Rhodes. It isn't that the people didn't like him. It's that Dusty Rhodes had the same issue that people accused Kevin Nash of a decade or two later. The guy with the pencil putting himself over. And I worried about this company from the moment I heard about it, because I don't trust Cody Rhodes.
Are you professional or not?
Yeah, listen, I'm professional, but Cody Rhodes is the son of Dusty. And last night, what he did was made a big spectacle of a match. First of all, Perfect 10 Spears came out with a chair and some cool lighting and the demon eyes everybody has now, and he looked pretty cool. And then Cody came out in a Goldberg-esque camera following him through the back area. Yeah, I know, Goldberg's gimmick. He's not the guy to imitate in pro wrestling anymore. This is 2019. Cody decided to dress up in costume. He had Star Trek. He had Star Trek. Look, Star Trek and pro wrestling go together. He had Star Trek. I don't know why they all dressed in Star Trek, and when I say they all, he had Diamond Dallas Page with him for no apparent reason. Page wasn't even pushing any yoga. He just had Diamond Dallas Page with him. He had Brandy with him in a head-to-toe silver jumpsuit, like one of the female characters from Star Trek would wear, because, again, this is a Star Trek-themed match now. Yeah, it's Star Trek-themed. Cody brought his dog. He brought his dog with him to the ring. He brought his dog and his wife. He brought his best friend Maxwell, and Maxwell brought his scarf, and they brought the dog, and they brought Diamond Dallas Page. and some yoga DVDs, and they just totally screwed up this entire intro. I had no idea what was going on. I expected them to teleport with that particle beam that they use, and they would all just evaporate and disappear and show up in a different program that I didn't care to watch. Unfortunately, the match did happen, and it just got worse. Cody chose the guy with the scarf, who he now calls his best friend, to stand at ringside with him. I do like that guy. That guy is hilarious, and he will be the future of the company if nobody else grabs him up. Again, I can't remember the guy's name, because he was overshadowed by the dog and the wife and Diamond Dallas Page and everything else that was happening. But the match begins, and it's a back and forth match where Tully keeps getting... This should have been about Tully Blanchard and his return to pro wrestling, and instead it was about Cody's friends and family. And then Double A ran out and gave his spine buster to Perfect 10, and the match ended. So there was a lot of chaos, and Cody gets over. I think it was the wrong finish. It was probably the wrong match. And the coolest thing about the build-up was the chair shot. I was so excited to see a real chair shot back in pro wrestling. I don't understand why we can't make chairs out of plastic and synthetic materials that get the same cracking noise when you pop somebody, but that don't cause a jarring on the skull. And no one's going to tell me that a composite plastic chair shot is going to be harder on somebody's head than being dropped on their head from the top rope with a superplex or a tombstone pile driver. It turns out the chair shot is not going to be something featured in AEW, and they used it in storyline to talk about what a heel Perfect 10 Spears was, and that disappointed me. I was kind of hoping we could use technology to get some more miles out of our pro wrestlers without selling out the history of pro wrestling. I'm not sure who decided that a steel folding chair was the perfect weapon for a pro wrestling heel, but it is. And by now, we've seen everyone try everything, from New Jack and his staple gun and his Hoover vacuum cleaner. We've seen everything, okay? But the sledgehammer, Triple H, the sledgehammer, it's even become trademark. But the steel folding chair, it is pro wrestling. The idea that we're going to remove that, or that we're going to have to substitute good headshots with a chair and good stiff chairs to, we'll substitute them with the way Bayley swings a chair at Charlotte on Tuesday Night Smackdown, which was embarrassing. Bayley has no idea how to swing a chair. She just doesn't. She couldn't. I thought, sure, on Raw, when she was swinging that chair at Becky, that they were going to pull her aside and say, listen, we have got to get somebody back here to teach you how to put some oomph into your chair shots, because it just looks like you're trying to wake her up or ask her to, excuse me, tap, tap. I didn't mean to hit you with this chair. But yeah, I was hoping that the future of pro wrestling wasn't more of Bayley chair shots and could be more of Perfect 10 Spears, but it turns out no. If anybody's listening, please make a composite plastic chair that looks and sounds like a steel chair shot, and if you're an up-and-coming pro wrestler who wants to get famous, buy 100 of them and start taking shots from them in the head, because I like seeing that. We can move on now. I've said my piece about Cody and the Rhodes family booking. I hope in the future Cody learns how to take a pin. Cody learned how to absorb all of Jeff Jarrett's contacts from Global Force for great lighting and great production value. I hope Cody learned from Jeff Jarrett how to lay down and take a 3 count once in a while, because I know his dad never taught him how to do that. So I hope somebody, maybe his older brother, could teach him how to take a 3 count for the betterment of the company, because I don't think the company is bettered by Cody winning that match. After Cody saves the universe from the wrath of Khan with the cast of Star Trek and his dog, let's move on to Phoenix and Pentagon Jr. versus the Young Bucks for the AAA Mexico Tag Team titles in a ladder match. For those of you keeping track at home, this is going to be the 6th time that these two teams have met in the last 9 months. Phoenix and Pentagon Jr. are a AAA tag team that have spent a lot of time in Impact Wrestling over the last year. In the coming weeks, I'm going to do a history segment on TNA/current Impact Wrestling. But Impact is the number 2 company, and until the TNT deal for AEW begins, Impact will remain the number 2 company, as it has been back to when it was TNA, as it has been since probably WCW shut its doors and TNA began back in 2002. I know some of you think Ring of Honor is a number 2. It's not. Ring of Honor is a minor league, and there's a lot of minor leagues. I consider Ring of Honor to be right up there with NXT and NXT UK and a lot of the other independents. But Impact Wrestling showcases worldwide talent now. I call it the Canadian Wrestling Federation, but they really are global. It's the idea Jeff Jarrett had for them, and they're continuing with that. They've featured a lot of Phoenix and Pentagon Jr. They beat me over the head with it as an Impact fan. I got tired of it. But these are some great wrestlers, and this is one of the best tag teams in the world. And they were facing the Young Bucks, who are one of the most popular tag teams in the world. But the Young Bucks are not one of the best tag teams in the world. They're just not. I know. It's not a popular opinion, but the Young Bucks have Fat Jackson and his brother, slightly less Fat Jackson, who's actually in pretty good shape. And they put on amazing matches. But they are a smaller version of the Rockers, who are a bigger version and a more in-shape version of the Rock and Roll Express. But this gimmick has been done. And as far as the Super Kick party goes, it's Shawn Michaels and the Rockers' finishing move. I've never been a fan of Generation Me / the Bucks of Youth. But they did the right thing in this match. This was their chance. This is going to be the end of this series of matches. And this was their chance to show what they think of Phoenix and Pentagon Jr. Phoenix came in injured, by the way, but you wouldn't have known it. And they did the right thing. They put these guys over because they know that they're not the best tag team in the world right now. And I'm not sure what's up with the Young Bucks. I heard fans of independent wrestling talking about how the Young Bucks are in a slump. It seems to me when you're kind of booking your own matches, you booked yourself in a slump. So I don't know that they're in a slump. I don't think I saw anything different last night than any other time I've seen them. They're a great tag team, but they're a little small, and I don't know how dedicated half of the Jacksons are to being the best tag team in the world. But boy, they made Phoenix and Pentagon Jr. look good. Ladder match was crazy. It really was probably one of the most dynamic ladder matches you'll ever see. Everybody's always got an opinion, and every ladder match is the best ladder match ever. So, ever since Shawn and Razor Ramon did it the first time. But this was a great match. I saw some stuff I'd never seen before. The flying power bomb over the top of a ladder through a table. I don't even know what to call that. It was great. It looked dangerous, and it looked like whichever member of Generation Me took that bump looked like it could have broke his neck. So.
Yep, I'm flying through the air. This is not good.
Yeah, no kidding. Great match, though, and the right team won. And then when it ended, there was a run-in from LAX. I'm not sure what they're going to be called now. I think Impact Wrestling has the rights to the LAX name, so they're Los Boricuas, maybe. These guys are huge south of the border, and they've been a big part of Impact. LAX has been a big part of Impact off and on for a decade, it seems. But this incarnation of LAX showed up on Impact on Friday night. Because it's taped. Impact's taping all their stuff in California and Mexico right now. So they're supposed to have a loser leaves Impact or a tag title match on Impact next week against the North for the tag belts. And if LAX loses, they leave the company. But for anybody who saw AEW or can read, everybody knows LAX showed up at AEW. So Friday night on Impact, you're going to see a match that's taped with a team that no longer works there fighting for their jobs, and you know they'll lose to the most uncharismatic team I've seen in a long time, the North, but we're not on that right now. Again, kudos to Phoenix and Pentagon Jr. for a great tag team ladder match, ending this series of matches with the Young Bucks, probably going back to Mexico with the AAA tag titles, just in time for AEW to come up with their own tag team titles, and the Young Bucks to obviously be contending for those throughout the rest of their careers, pretty much. There was a women's match, a singles one-on-one match, to decide who will face Nyla Rose for the first AEW Women's Championship, and it was Hikaru Shida versus Riho. I love Hikaru Shida. Her Instagram is awesome. Riho is 22, and I believe she's been wrestling since she was 9 years old. Kenny Omega is a big fan and brought her into the company, and probably is the reason she won this match. So Tiny Riho, who's got this crazy Japanese anime costume with like an adult diaper on underneath, is going to be facing huge, imposing Nyla Rose, who might kill her. I guess there's drama in that since we watch Nyla Rose be irresponsible and probably injure people in the Casino Battle Royal. So now there's added interest for me to see if Nyla Rose kills Riho. I wouldn't be surprised if Tiny Riho ends up the first champion. She's fun to watch, but it'll be the David versus Goliath story. She's so small and Nyla Rose is so big, so that's going to be coming up probably on the first TNT televised show. The AEW All Out main event was to crown the new inaugural World Heavyweight Champion. We see Hangman Page ride in on a horse to face new look super heel Chris Jericho in a fancy leather jacket with spikes and a cool new theme song. It's actually a good theme song. And a slightly less fat out of shape body. He's probably lost 20 pounds to get ready for this fight, but when you are 100 pounds overweight, the 20 really, it doesn't do much. And Jericho slipped Jim Ross some cash under the table before this pay-per-view because Jim Ross continued to comment on Chris Jericho's body, how great he looked, and it was sad. Chris Jericho's body did not look great. So thank you, Jim Ross, for that. You know, Chris Jericho had to win this match, and for anybody who is upset about it, who's an indie fan, I have two things to say. One, Hangman Page came in out of shape. I'll get to that in a moment. Number two, in 10 years, whether AEW makes it another year or another 10, Wikipedia is going to tell us that Chris Jericho was the inaugural AEW World Champion. And then you're going to click on Chris Jericho's name, and it's going to tell you that Chris Jericho was the first ever undisputed WCW and WWF World Heavyweight Champion. So, if he was available, he was the right choice. There are very few people with as established of a resume as Chris Jericho that will actually establish your world title as meaning something in the future. Hangman Page does not establish your title. So this was the right choice. Now on to Hangman Page. I don't really understand all of the moving parts here. There's a storyline that says that this kid is wrapped up for a long time in a long-term deal with AEW. I mean, AEW is a brand new company. I think long-term is an interesting concept for a wrestling company. It just got off the ground. And if that's true, then they should be disappointed in the way he came into this match. Because he came in out of shape, came in soft. His cardio was so bad that with a few minutes to go left in the match, with Jericho trying to keep the pace up, to keep the fans interested, it had been a long night, 4.5, 5 hours of wrestling. Hangman Page couldn't even get over the top rope to execute one of his own moves, and the fans started laughing at him. If you want to be the face of the company, even on a night when you're jobbing, this is a big moment. This match will forever define the inception of this title, and you came in out of shape with a sourpuss on your face riding a horse. I don't know that Hangman Page should be happy with the look he gave. But if he is on a long-term contract, he's got time to repair it. Of course, for those of you that watched, at the 8-minute mark, we got to witness Chris Jericho eat the ring. No, I'm kidding. He really didn't eat the ring. No, I know. It's in poor taste. But I kind of hoped that the weight gain was going to be something for a gimmick and for an angle, and he would come into this match ripped and strong and had turned a bunch of that fat into muscle mass. But no. Chris has been eating on his cruises for a long time now. As they say, it is what it is. He's going to look great in the record books as the first ever AEW World Champion. It was a great match. Chris hit him with his new Judas kiss, in other words, a backwards defensive elbow to the jaw, and knocked him out. So, as Jericho would say, you're welcome. And so ended like I said, 5.5, 6 hours of wrestling. I don't know, the buy-in was long. The pay-per-view was 4.5 hours. So they gave us everything they could through the kitchen sink at this one to get ready for the TNT debut. I'm sure Chris Jericho is going to be a lot of fun to watch on television when he's not having to perform without his shirt on. He is one of the best promo men in the business, so it should be a lot of fun. Moving on to Monday, we got Monday Night Raw from September 2nd. All right, we start off Braun Strowman and Seth Rollins, the tag team champions, contract signing for a Universal title match at Clash of Champions. If you can follow all of that. Ends up with the best AJ Styles promo since he's joined the WWE. This was well written. I don't know how much he had to do with it, probably very little, but this was very good. Came out with the club. It turns into Bobby Roode and Dolph Ziggler with the club versus Strowman and Seth, and it's a no contest, and they beat them up. Stone Cold starts tweeting, if you believe that's actually happening, and by the end of the program we learn that there will be another attempt at a contract signing mediated by Stone Cold next week in Madison Square Garden. I wonder what they're paying Austin to all of a sudden come be on Raw and make all these appearances. I wonder if it's the appearance fee that we've been rumored The Undertaker's getting for going over to Saudi Arabia and Brock is getting for going over for Saudi Arabia. That's a big number. I'd like to think Austin would do it because it's for the betterment of the company. And better, the better the company does, the more money Austin makes. But who knows? Natalya versus Lacey Evans. Nice to see Lacey back on TV a couple weeks in a row. I think Corey said it best. Natalya is a nasty. It was a good physical match. Natalya's finally doing what she should have been doing for years, and that's making newer talent look good in the ring and jobbing. This is what Natty should be doing, and she's done a good job the last couple weeks. She let Sasha look good in her return, and now she's made Lacey Evans look good. I like it. Becky Lynch, Sasha Banks, future feud promo. The future is now, folks. Becky Lynch is unhappy with Sasha.
You can act like a man!
She's the man.
What's the matter with you?
She is the man. She wears that t-shirt that looks like Stone Cold Steve Austin to tell you that. Sasha Banks delivers the line of the night, saying, I wish I would have been punched in the face by Nia Jax and then I could have been given a world title too. And boy, isn't that the truth. By the way, later, when history shows what side everybody was on, I have the official membership card with the number 001 as the first ever member of the I'm Over This Becky Lynch Push fan club. Yeah, I was over it before WrestleMania. Okay, the man with her Speed Racer outfit, I'm totally over this. Which is why I enjoy what happens at the end of the night. We'll get to that later. Poor Cesaro. Cesaro just can't catch a break. I don't know who he upset, but ever since Sheamus gets diagnosed with some kind of neck or back injury, Cesaro has jobbed to everyone, and I mean everyone, in every type of scenario. He jobs in King of the Ring qualifiers, and then he jobs in return matches that don't even need to happen. He jobs to The Miz tonight. The Miz is a guy that can get over no matter how many times he loses. And everybody's still going to cheer him, and they're going to love him. The Miz is a guy who can go out and do despicable things to a babyface, and the next week, if he says something funny on Miz TV, everybody's going to cheer him. Everybody's going to yell awesome when he comes out. He is the closest thing to Ric Flair that this company has, and that he's going to get cheered and sell a little bit of merch no matter what he does. He can be a heel that carries a solid fan base. He even has his own show they've given him. So why does he need to beat Cesaro? Why does The Miz, an average wrestler with a great gimmick who doesn't need the push, get to beat a guy like Cesaro, who is a far superior wrestler who needs a push? I would choose not to think that it's because Cesaro came from the independents. I think we're over that now. But Cesaro was one of the kings of wrestling, remember? I think Vince gets this perverted kick out of burying guys that made a name in another company. And Cesaro's a fantastic wrestler. He deserves better than he's getting right now from the WWE, that's for sure. We move forward with King of the Ring with a couple matches. We have Ricochet versus Samoa Joe in what is a great match. You should check this one out if you're the kind of person who only fast forwards through Raw and watches a couple of matches. Watch Samoa Joe versus Ricochet. I'm not yet sold on Ricochet, but this is a creative finish, and they both executed it really well. Ends up being a double pin, and it puts them both in a triple threat match next week, with the man who would be the winner of the Cedric Alexander-Baron Corbin Round 2 King of the Ring match, which was Baron Corbin. So next week we're going to have Baron Corbin versus Ricochet versus Samoa Joe in a triple threat to move on to the finals. Baron Corbin versus Alexander, good match. They played off Alexander as getting jumped in the back by the club, which is how Corbin won. But how Corbin won is that he's a great heel who gets booed by everybody in the crowd. And a guy that can elicit that kind of reaction deserves a push. You need a guy like that to be a legitimate threat. They've already castrated Corbin's character by having the terrible haircut and the biker gimmick, and he wins Money in the Bank and then cashes in as a loser. So, and he's never going to live that down. Every time John Cena comes back for the rest of Corbin's career, he's going to remind Baron Corbin that he failed at Money in the Bank, and everybody's going to laugh. And Corbin can put on any dress shirt he'd like, and he can shave his head, and it won't matter, because that happened. So, King of the Ring, That might help wash some of the stink off from the failed Money in the Bank. I would like to see Samoa Joe as King of the Ring. I'd like to see Baron Corbin as King of the Ring. Anybody but Elias. King of the Ring did not have the roster I would have liked to have seen, but the guys that are getting through, it could end up being a good King of the Ring. I could end up happy if Joe or Corbin ends up winning this thing. And they've got an interesting story going with Chad Gable on the other side. We'll get to that later. In my own little laugh out loud segment tonight, I'm going to call Bray Wyatt's Firefly Funhouse the winner, where he takes a shot at Vince McMahon. He apparently called out Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman on Twitter, challenging them to a Hell in the Cell match, and Vince McMahon chastised him, trying to put him in his place, because, you got to work your way up to that kind of thing. Makes me think of back when Chris Jericho started working an angle on live television, claiming that Bill Goldberg was afraid of him. And then he brought out action figures and held a match one week where his action figure pinned Bill Goldberg's action figure, and he started declaring himself the man who beat the streak. And Bischoff was understandably pissed. He created this gimmick, and this punk Y2J, before he was Y2J, he's the Lionheart Chris Jericho, keeps telling everybody he belongs in the main event. Bray Wyatt's had this problem since he got here. Wyndham Rotunda. I guess Vince wasn't impressed. So on this week's Firefly Funhouse, the Vince McMahon puppet returns, and he feeds it money as a way to say that as long as you're selling t-shirts, Vince will let you get away with anything. And this is truly funny, and I think, yes, I think that we should all give a round of applause to Wyndham Rotunda, Bray Wyatt, and The Fiend. This was good stuff. So that brings us to this week's main event on Raw. It's champions versus champions. We've got the women's tag team champions, Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross, who I think are awesome, by the way, taking on both women's champions, Becky Lynch and Bayley, everybody's favorite children's role model. If you haven't seen this match, you're going to want to watch it. Depending on how things work out over the next couple decades, this may end up being one of the most important matches in the career of Bayley, where she turns heel for the first time. In the greatest heel turn since Bash at the Beach, 1996. This was pretty impressive.
You are worse than Hulk Hogan.
I don't know that she's worse than Hulk Hogan, but the way she was swinging that chair at the man Becky Lynch, I couldn't tell if the fans were booing the way she swung the chair or the actual heel turn. That's a joke. As a matter of fact, the fans were not booing. When she started hitting Becky with the chair, the fans popped pretty loud. They popped louder for Bayley than we've heard them since maybe the UK when they serenaded her with Hey Bayley song. I Want to Know If You'll Be My Girl, which was a great moment in pro wrestling. If you haven't seen that, YouTube, NXT UK, Bayley versus Nia Jax. It was... I've never heard a crowd in unison, all behind one person, all singing in perfect timing like that before. It's quite a moment in wrestling history. Basically, Vince McMahon is probably crying right now because Paul Heyman convinced someone to allow the person who sells the most t-shirts to children to now turn heel. And in Vince's mind, it's the reason John Cena hasn't turned heel. You print money with these ultra-sweet babyface characters, and when they do things like turn on the most popular women's champion in the last year and beat her up with a chair, it upsets people. But I think it's a great move for the depth and development of the Bayley character. Even Britney Spears started making videos for adults at some point. Come on, Bayley. Put on a sexy outfit and show us you're a grown-up. So anyway, Monday Night Raw, main event, Bayley turns heel. That's what Paul Heyman shoots out for us. We move on to Smackdown. Eric Bischoff answers with the resolution to the Erik, Rowan, Daniel, Bryan, Roman Reigns attempted vehicular homicide angle. It's been going on for 4 weeks, and it's finally resolved itself. And I was quite impressed. That took place in the main event. We're going to get to that. But getting here, Bayley comes out, cuts a promo at the intro of SmackDown, telling people that basically she needed to teach their kids how to be loyal. And that's why she beat up Becky with a chair, because Sasha's her best friend. It was a weak premise, but yeah, I bought it. I like it. Charlotte comes out and cuts a promo. Charlotte gets more cartoonish in her presentation. Like every month, she gets a little more glamorous. I love it, but gosh, it's very plastic, very fabricated. It's crazy that she's the same awkwardly tall flare child that showed up 6 or 7 years ago on the scene. I don't know. She's, I would say like a glamorous model, but it's bizarre. She's so tall, and all of her features are so large now. It's strange. It's hot. You know, it's hot like Southern California hot. Nobody accuses her of being a Midwest corn-fed woman. No. I should probably cut that whole segment out there. Bayley and Sasha beat up Charlotte with a chair. They're not buying her fabricated body any more than I am. They decided to beat her up with a chair, so that gets over with some people. I think Charlotte should always have one of the belts or always be competing for one of the belts because Charlotte's the most talented women's wrestler on their roster. I think the only person Charlotte should have been taking a back seat to is Ronda Rousey. But it seems that a lot of smart marks want them to push characters, and I guess Charlotte's been given too much, so she's got to take her spot on the sideline. I don't know. I don't see Becky Lynch continuing to draw, so the Flair name alone and the robes they wear will put asses in seats. So time will tell whether Becky Lynch has a multi-time title reign under her belt or if this is going to be a one-off. I don't know. There's a reason why they waited till last to really give Becky a big push. So we'll see. There's another rival company now. Any woman that goes to it who's ever had any kind of name in WWE is immediately going to be huge. In an era where Tenille Dashwood has floundered for years and now is immediately walking in and getting a title shot on another promotion. AEW's got Nyla Rose, so they'll take anybody who can actually wrestle a match without putting somebody in the hospital. Samoa Joe cuts a really mean backstage promo on Chad Gable that it appears that Chad Gable's new gimmick is the sympathetic character. So everybody picks on him, and everybody tells him he's no good. And he's got this sad look. I wonder who the first person in the back was to come up to him and be like, you know what you should do? You should make people feel bad for you by giving them a puppy dog. Maybe it was Michael Hayes. Maybe it was Michael Hayes coming up going, you know, man, you can't get over with anything you do, brother. So maybe we'll just let people run over your foot with a car and see if it makes them sympathize with your character. I don't know. I'd love to know. Or maybe Vince, like, we're going to have everybody make fun of you every week and insult you and call you a little boy. That does kind of sound like something Vince would do. But it's kind of working. Because I'll tell you, I didn't really buy Chad Gable with the, I've got a 1980s perm and should be driving a T-top Camaro. I didn't buy that. With the American flag onesie. That's what he was doing. The American flag onesie and the T-top Camaro perm. I think he even had a headband. It's just not a good look. So, given a choice, I think you'd rather give people puppy dog eyes and try to make them feel bad for you. It worked. He won his match, so Andrade's going to be a great wrestler once he can learn how to speak enough English to stumble through a promo. In the meantime, Selena Vega looks really good doing it for him. But I don't think Vince is ever going to be okay with pushing a guy towards the world title who just can't speak English. That's why Shinsuke hasn't gotten a shot. Shinsuke's over. Everybody loves him, even as a heel. Vince doesn't want to have an international world champion that can't represent the company on the Today Show or, go out and give an interview without embarrassing himself. So Andrade's got to get past that or else he's going to keep losing to guys like Chad Gable. Should probably mention that Randy Orton and the Revival squashed the New Day in another promo, which is probably going to lead to Kofi facing Randy at a pay-per-view and somehow sneaking out another win over an opponent who is a much better wrestler than he is. I am over the Kofi Kingston era. I thought it was nifty that they gave him the belt. I thought it was misplaced happening at WrestleMania. This is terrible, and it needs to end. He's a transitional champion. I'm not sure why it's taking this long to transition back to a legitimate title holder. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they won't job Randy twice at 2 consecutive pay-per-views. I would like to see this end with Randy holding the world title up, and then maybe in the future we get a Randy Orton Triple H feud. That would be kind of cool. Jump into the Wayback Machine. That would really piss people off that accuse all these old guys of squashing young talent. I just want to point out that Kofi's about 62 years old. So seeing Randy beat the 62-year-old Jamaican is not going to upset me. I don't think he's squashing any young talent. I mean, Kofi will be fine. His Social Security checks are going to kick in any day now. So the bathroom break segment of the night was Shelton Benjamin versus Aleister Black. I'd like to know whose idea it was to pull Aleister Black up to the main roster, because it was a terrible idea. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Shinsuke Nakamura and his new hype man got about 5 minutes to beat up a local jobber and show that Sami Zayn can irritate people talking about somebody else as much as he irritates people talking about himself. I love Sami Zayn's new gimmick, holding the fans accountable. I hope that continues, but right now he's a hype man. I don't know what that means. I guess they don't want to use him as a jobber and destroy the credibility they've already tried to give him. So they're going to connect him to a winner until they can figure out a better use for him. I'm fine with that. So let's get to the main event, which, it's not even really a match, but this Daniel Bryan, Erik Rowan, Roman Reigns attempted vehicular homicide angle. In a way, it's very Nitro, but you can't just say this is an Eric Bischoff thing. Vince has had many people get hit by cars, and he's used cars in his storylines before. But I'll tell you one thing that happened. You should watch this if you haven't. I'm not going to ruin anything, but Erik Rowan gets a chance. And you might say, well, Erik Rowan's had a chance. I thought Erik Rowan had a chance too. If you would have asked me a week ago, hey, what do you think of Erik Rowan? I'd say he's an underachiever. For the amount of opportunities he's been given and the people he's been connected to, I would have told you he was an underachiever. But I think I may have been wrong. This was an impressive promo. It was good mic work. He didn't look awkward at all, and it was believable. And it makes you wonder, since this character is not really a departure from the character he played with the Wyatt family or with the Bludgeon Brothers, why he never got a chance before. If Bray Wyatt would have been sitting here right now as a 5-time world champion, it would have been pretty obvious why the guys in his stable weren't given a chance to step up. But he wasn't. And it didn't work out that way. And when you think about this, Vince McMahon and Triple H and Bray Wyatt and Luke Harper and Daniel Bryan have all had about 5 years to find a way to make Erik Rowan interesting. And Eric Bischoff did it in 4 weeks. And I was complaining that this was dragging on and it wasn't going anywhere because I didn't see it going anywhere except a Daniel Bryan Roman Reigns fight where most likely Roman Reigns would win. But that's not what happened. And if Eric and Paul's jobs, when they were put in charge of Smackdown and Raw respectively, were to find a creative way to bring up newer talent, then I think they're both doing a good job. If that's not Eric's job, then this was really bold. If Eric Bischoff was not charged with bringing new guys up and sticking them in main events, then this is a really bold move, hitching his wagon to a 4-week storyline that centers around Erik Rowan. But it worked. So kudos to Eric Bischoff. If you haven't seen it, go see it. As a matter of fact, we've got Bayley's heel turn on Raw, but you're only as good as your last performance, and SmackDown happened on Tuesday. The Erik Rowan thing is great. And it's the thing that happened most recently. So we live in a 24-hour news cycle, folks. Bayley's been a bad guy for like 4 forevers as far as my dog sees the world. Bayley's never been anything but a bad guy as far as a fruit fly is concerned. And a lot of wrestling fans, they've got the attention span of a fruit fly or of my dog. So Bayley's a bad guy. And Erik Rowan is interesting. And this is good stuff. This was a very busy week. We've wrapped up all of this week's events. We're going to move on now to the history segment. This is the history segment, right? Not a disco revival segment or a 1960s cultural segment. You don't have to turn that up. No, you can turn that down. We'll have a sponsor break here at some point with a more appropriate song. Let's fade that out. King of the Ring has been something that we have been told for years is the stepping stone to the World Championship. That is, until it was eliminated for the Bad Blood pay-per-view, everybody's favorite pay-per-view, Bad Blood. The King of the Ring, it's been done many different ways. We've tried doing qualifying and preliminary matches on television. We've done the entire tournament in one night. You take a look through the winners, it's not exactly as Vince McMahon would have you believe. I took a list of all the people that have won, And I divided them into two categories of what I consider to be a championship resume, not necessarily the WWE championship, but the kind of man you give a championship to when it's all said and done. Is this person considered a champion versus people that never quite made it for one reason or another, not always their fault. I came out with 13 champions, 7 non-champions. And my non-champions, you might consider championship caliber. We'll go down the list here. Don the Rock Morocco and Harley Race, followed by Randy Savage, but then Ted DiBiase and Tito Santana. I don't think Ted DiBiase and Tito Santana are, in my opinion, world championship caliber athletes. Not in gimmick, not in look, not in wrestling ability. Bret Hart was the next winner. His brother Owen, Bret Hart won twice, his brother Owen won the next one. Owen never had a chance to become champion. Owen would have definitely been a TNA champion at some point had he lived. Probably would have been a WCW champion. Never got a chance. King Mabel, Viscera, never quite worked out. And then we've got a good run of Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, and Ken Shamrock. I consider Ken Shamrock a champion. Vince may not have given him a world title. That's a subject for another segment at another time. We got Billy Gunn. He never quite got there. Followed by Kurt Angle, Edge, Brock Lesnar, Booker T. William Regal, not quite, but Sheamus, world champion, and followed by Bad News Barrett, and then they shut it down. I don't think we can blame Bad News Barrett. There was a 5-year break between Sheamus's King of the Ring and Bad News Barrett's 2015 King of the Ring. But I guess the Bad News Barrett Neville finish in Moline, Illinois didn't light the world on fire. I got no problem with either of those guys. But there's got to be some star power to your roster for this tournament. And that's why I had a problem with the 2019 tournament. I understand Cedric Alexander and Ricochet are very acrobatic, physically gifted men. They'd look great in Cirque du Soleil. I'm not interested in seeing them fight Brock Lesnar. And that's the kind of pro wrestling I want. I'm not interested in seeing Ricochet versus The Undertaker. And if The Undertaker can't make a guy interesting, then I don't want to watch him in a King of the Ring tournament either. I think that the list of guys who were runners-up to King of the Ring is as interesting as the list of the guys who won. Let me read you some of these names. The Iron Sheik. I would have loved a world where the Iron Sheik cut promos on how he was the king of wrestling for 365 days. King Kong Bundy, a legitimate tough guy. Bam Bam Bigelow. Razor Ramon, Mankind, The Rock, X-Pac. Kurt Angle was a runner-up once after winning. Rob Van Dam, Bobby Lashley, CM Punk, Johnny Impact Morrison. The list of guys who didn't win and never got a chance again is almost as good as the guys who did and became champions. So I think getting to the finals of King in the Ring and putting on a good match could be the indicator. I don't know that Viscera or King Mabel ever put up a 5-star match the way some people rank matches. He's just not physically able. I don't know that Billy Gunn was ever an interesting enough character to have a solo match that would have earned him a world title consideration. And I've seen him wrestle in a lot of different promotions. So it is what you make of it. But the hype that this is the stepping stone to the world title is absolutely not true, and you don't even need to win the thing. I guess there's hope if we end up seeing Elias somehow in the finals of this King of the Ring tournament. I guess there's hope that he may still never win a world title, even if he wins King of the Ring. So this week, we're going to move on to the third segment, where we're going to talk about what this podcast is and what you should expect from it in the future. What separates it and differentiates it from other podcasts that you could listen to about pro wrestling. So, we got a little funky music for you. There could be a sponsor ad here between segments. Speaking of segments, this is going to be a 3-segment podcast each week. News, recaps, and rumors to start it off, followed by a history segment where this week we talked about King of the Ring, but we're going to try to tie things that are going on in 2019 or in the current year of this podcast to stuff that's happened in the past. So we'll call it a history segment. And the third segment, the one we're in right now, is going to be a rotating segment. If we can get this music to fade. I was not prepared to have the Tonight Show band behind me. Not that there's anything wrong with Tommy Newsom. It's a little reference for your grandparents out there that used to watch Johnny Carson at night. The Doc Severinsen and the Tonight Show Band, except Doc Severinsen was never there. And this really dull guy named Tommy Newsom, who wore terrible suits, was always in his place. And Johnny had his own suit company, so Johnny loved to pick on Tommy. I was an embryo when this show was on the air. I've watched the replays. So, okay, they're on YouTube. Check them out. So, we're going to be a 3-segment podcast. The reason you're going to want to listen to us is simple. I'm here making this podcast for you because I decided that there had to be a good pro wrestling podcast out there that I could listen to that would, in about an hour, tell me what I might have missed over the course of the last week or 2 weeks. In case life happens, because life happens sometimes, and for normal people, pro wrestling isn't your top priority. I thought it could be decently produced and entertaining to listen to. You would be amazed at how difficult that is to find. And I don't know that actually you would be amazed because you're here. And I'm making this podcast so you don't have to. Because if you feel like I feel, you walk out of an hour-long podcast about pro wrestling with a lot of news about MMA from some guys, a lot of news about new flavors of barbecue sauce from other people that you've grown up with and you really respect, but that you don't want to buy barbecue sauce from in your wrestling podcast. Or auto parts. Or you don't want to hear about a cruise. You're not a fan who's going to quit his part-time job at a retail store to be able to go on Chris Jericho's cruise. So you'd rather it not be advertised to you. And while you're listening to a pro wrestling podcast, you'd rather not hear interviews with guys like Sebastian Bach. Listen, I love Sebastian Bach. Youth Gone Wild and all that stuff from Skid Row to Gilmore Girls. I'm a big fan. But when I tune in to a pro wrestling podcast and I've settled in, I don't want to hear celebrity musicians. I want to hear about pro wrestling. I like MMA. I don't want to hear about MMA when I tune into a pro wrestling podcast. I've tried so many, and I've heard guys, like groups of people, that talk as if they're in the study lounge of their fraternity or their dormitory floor where they all get together and eat pizza and talk about the week in wrestling. And they use inside jokes and nicknames for each other, and they use impersonal pronouns instead of calling wrestlers by their names, so that if you miss it while they're all talking over each other, you don't even know who they're talking about, and they're just not broadcasters. And they're not even good pro wrestling fans. And there's so much negativity that even when you find people that want to talk about pro wrestling, they're telling you all the reasons why you shouldn't have been watching this week. All the mistakes that are being made, and how you're being beat over the head by Roman Reigns, and how Vince McMahon's a moron. Well, I don't think Vince McMahon's a moron. Roman Reigns is a topic for a segment sometime. I don't want to get lost on that, but I grew up going outside to play on Saturdays and coming in early when I didn't have to, before the sun went down, to watch WCW Saturday Night or NWA Saturday Night on TBS, the Superstation, on our basic cable package. Because everybody in the country had the Superstation, and where some people got out of bed on Sunday mornings and skipped church to watch the WWF, I always found that to be cartoonish. Then I went to church, but I got my wrestling for 2 hours on Saturday nights. And then on Sundays, I watched the UWF with Jim Ross and Jim Herd and Michael Hayes and all the guys that came up from World Class. And I watched World Class Championship Wrestling when I went to my grandparents' house. They had a different cable package. And I could watch what was going on down in Texas. And it was the craziest thing when I would see a guy leave World Class and show up on the UWF or on WCW or NWA. Weekly recap shows, and Ric Flair would be traveling the country from indie promotion to indie promotion with the big gold belt. And everywhere seemed connected except the WWF. And when I'd watch the WWF, I felt bad for them sometimes. That they couldn't have legitimate characters. That they had to have cartoon characters. Now, I didn't know that the WWF made so much more money than all of these indies. And I could have never predicted, and I don't think most people in the business at the time could have predicted that Vince would own everything someday. But he does. And we're now in an era where there's going to be a number 2. And the number 2 is going to have weekly cable television. We haven't had that in 20 years. So that's a big deal. And it's time for a podcast about pro wrestling. That's all pro wrestling. not a weekly podcast that people do out of routine to stay consistent with what they used to do, where they talk about the goings-on in their lives. Honestly, I hope you guys never know too much about what's going on in my life, because that's creepy. This is a podcast about pro wrestling, and I'm not a pro wrestler. I'm a guy who listens to other podcasts and is going to disseminate the garbage to bring you about an hour a week of solid news and results, with some commentary and some informative stuff that you might not have thought to research or never saw when it originally happened. And I'll relate it to what's happening every Monday or every Tuesday night when you're watching a current program. Mostly, though, I guess the best reason I'm here doing this podcast is because I'd like to have a forum to talk about pro wrestling, and I think a lot of people would. If you read the comments on Instagram posts or if you look at forum threads, pro wrestling fans are very opinionated and they like to have a voice, and I guess I'm no different. But I'd like this podcast to be the voice of rational, logical pro wrestling fans who understand the business and understand that it's entertainment and are looking to be entertained, who might not have 7 hours a week sometimes to watch pro wrestling. This was a busy week. I knew I was going to be trying to do a premiere podcast, so I had to watch the buy-in and the AEW pay-per-view and Raw and Smackdown on time. You can't be going and kicking the DVR if you're bringing people news. I've got to watch these things as they happen. CM Punk was talking. I don't know that there's ever been a time since the merger of WCW and WWF where there's been so much news and content on the 24-hour news cycle where things can change quickly, and we're in maybe the second golden age of professional wrestling, the way we've recently been in the second golden age of television. Maybe that's where we are. And maybe we'll see new stars that people look at in the next generation, like Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, from this generation. I don't know. All I know is I've had trouble finding a 1-hour podcast with people that don't irritate the hell out of me. So I'm going to give you a 1-hour all pro wrestling, 100% pro wrestling podcast. And I hope you enjoy it and come back. I'm going to try to distribute this in every means that I can, but I am not a podcast expert. So I'm going to learn about distribution as I get better at this production. You've probably noticed it's been a little sloppy. I've talked about my producer, Chuck. There is no producer. This is me and some sound effects. And, I probably deserve some applause for the work that I've went through here. Yeah, you think that's funny? Thank you. Thank you. This is hard earned. But everything from the volume controls to the sound drops to the pages that turn here of notes that I've got, this is all me. So I hope you appreciate it, and when I find a way for you to subscribe, I hope you subscribe. The way I listen to podcasts is I ask my Google Home Assistant to play the recent podcast of X, and it goes out and plays it, and I've found a lot of podcasts that way. So I'm going to try to make these available on the Alexa and on the Google Home Assistant so that people who just talk to their house, the way I talk to my house, can talk to the house and bring me into the house. And I hope to be a good member of your house. I promise not to make a mess. I won't raid your refrigerator. And I won't hit on your daughter. I'll just bring you pro wrestling news. And I will never sell you barbecue sauce. With that in mind, I want to thank you all for listening. Podcast is interesting in that I'm talking to you today, but you might be listening years from now. So from the 2019 September 5th version of me, JB, to you wherever you are in time and in space, thank you for listening, and I hope you find a way to listen in the future. Till next week, this has been the All Pro Wrestling 100 Podcast.